Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth. This program features in-depth conversations with the leading names in the subjects of UFOs, abductees, the paranormal, panel discussions, and the very best and brightest of the next generation of writers and researchers. Meanwhile Here on Earth, the show breaking new ground in alternative talk with your intrepid host, veteran investigative writer and researcher, Peter Robbins.
Good evening, or afternoon, or morning. Peter Robbins here with Meanwhile Here on Earth, and welcome back, or welcome. You are listening, or you can listen and watch at KGRA-DB for digitalbroadcasting.com, or on KGRA's Facebook page, or on their YouTube channel. A monologue tonight is about a dear friend lost last week. Clifford Mahudi, a Zuni tribal elder, a civil engineer, a man who lived a life in two worlds, died last week on January 18th at the age of 77. He was a good and true friend of mine, as well as many other people. He was a structural engineer for the Department of Housing and Urban Development. He was a keeper of the sacred knowledge held by tribal elders on subjects such as Zuni cosmology, contact with ETs, medicine societies, and inner earth realms of this earth. He was a member of the tribal order of the Kachina priesthood, Galaxy Medicine Society, Sun Clan, and wisdom keeper of the Zuni history and spiritual practices. At differing times in his professional life, Mahudi worked for oil companies and various that's a good one, U.S. government programs for housing under Housing and Urban Development and planning design for construction of Indian reservation infrastructures and school projects. Clifford also served in the U.S. Public Health Service as a commissioned officer in providing services to American Indian communities. He served in Oklahoma and Arizona in water, wastewater, and solid waste systems. Some photos of Clifford as we move forward here. Clifford was instrumental in the contracting of federally funded programs where Indian nations can administer projects including planning, design, construction of facilities and infrastructure, schools, hospitals, law and order, housing. The act is known as PL. Now, who needs the number? It's the Indian Self-Determination and Education Act of 1974. Visit his website at nativewisdomacademy.net. I first met Clifford about 10 years ago at a UFO conference, and it was love at first sight. He was as funny and as kind and irreverent as he was wise and thoughtful and considerate. He had a way of immediately insinuating himself in the life of people that he cared about. And on one particular afternoon, he really changed my life in a way. We were in the Sitgraves National Forest, having just visited the site of Travis Walton and the men who were with him's abduction event of November 1975. And he picked up on something that was going on with me that was troubling me deeply. And he said, let's go for a walk. And we walked into the forest until we were just out of sight of everyone in this wilderness forest. And he said, I want to do a ceremony with you. And he produced a small bag of corn flour and asked me to pick up a pebble. In fact, this one right here, and talked to me about nature, its wisdom, the fact that he knew that I was carrying a great deal of weight that was troubling me and that it was time to let it go. And with that, we let the cornflower loose on the nearest tree and on the ground around us. And I immediately burst into hysterical sobbing. And it was one of the best cries I've had in many years. Walked out of the woods with him feeling about 10 years younger and about 10 pounds lighter. I was shocked and saddened when I learned he died last week. You know, he was 77 and had health issues and lived a long, full life. But some people, you're just not ready, even if they are, for them to go. And mostly what I will miss with Clifford is just the fun that we had together. We spoke every few months, and we were both looking forward to reciprocal visits. I had dreamt, and so had he, that he would be my guide through Monument Valley. I guess now that will happen for me in my dreams. And that my guest room here just outside of Ithaca, New York, was going to be where he was staying after some talks that he was going to be giving in New York State later this year. So, Clifford, thanks for the stone. We love you, and we'll see you around the campus. Now, to the living. This evening's guest is Raymond Szymanski, a 4-decade U.S. government senior scientist turned paranormal researcher and author. He has devoted a good part of his investigatory life to taking us inside the top-secret holy grail of ufology, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, to look at previously unexplored alien visitation possibilities. His interest in extraterrestrials and their connection to Wright-Pat was ignited during his very first week of government employment by a mentor who eventually earned promotion to the exclusive ranks of the senior executive service. This intriguing backstory and many revelatory adventures are presented as Ray investigated his way through the UFO ET phenomena, transforming from a curious, skeptical researcher to a firm believer in the extraterrestrial hypothesis. Relying on decades of professional experience, Raymond did his own research, investigating available facts and theories all the way to the ground, trusting yet verifying. The result is an exclusive first-person adventure story spaced through 3 different books and many lectures that Ray has given over the years, articles, and it's an extraordinary narrative. I have only read one of the books, which is Ray's most recent, Swamp Gas My Ass, one of the finest titles of any UFO book, and one of the gutsiest, and one of the truest. Ray, welcome to Meanwhile here on Earth.
Hey, thanks for having me. It was a great intro, and you know that thing that you read, some of it was true.
Oh, good.
I'll let you decide what parts.
Okay. I think I butchered your last name there. Will you give us the correct pronunciation?
You came as close as anybody could possibly be expected to. The first 3 characters are pronounced Shaw, so it's Szymanski, and there's no particular emphasis on any of the syllables. But if you were in Poland, the A is a long I sound, and it would be Szymanski, but everybody kind of does a little, Americanization to make it easier in the ghetto. But good job. You did a good job.
When you first came to my attention years ago, the depth of your experience at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base kind of caught me off guard. Nobody spends as much time there as you do, and we were joking before we came on the air that, in fact, you are now in a dungeon directly below the base where they allow you to occasionally do radio interviews. You are actually in the area, which is your home zone. And I wanted to start kind of at the beginning, before we get into what we're here to talk about, where were you born?
I was born in Hamtramck, Michigan, and Hamtramck is actually a city within a city. It sits in the heart of Detroit. So, I jokingly mentioned ghettos, but when people came to America, they wanted to look for folks from the old country who spoke the language,
Sure.
cooked the same food, that sort of thing. So, Hamtramck is where my mother's parents settled, and my father's parents were one generation earlier. So it's the grandparents from my mother's side who emigrated, the great-grandparents from my father's side. Well, they eventually met and lived not too far outside Hamtramck, but a lot of my mother's ties were in that city. And so I was born in now a long since gone hospital called St. Francis in Hamtramck.
Got it.
So that's my birthplace.
Would you say for somebody in an immigrant family like mine, that you grew up in a traditional Polish way?
Unfortunately, my father being, one generation earlier, he didn't speak Polish, but my mother could read, write, speak anything in Polish. I mean, she, and all her brothers and sisters were the same way. And unfortunately, my dad didn't take an interest or didn't have the time. So we never got to learn that. And, my dear mother is still alive today. She's 95.
Wow. Mazel tov. Way to go.
Yep. Thank you so much. She's
Bravo.
95, and her 96th birthday is coming up this July. She was born on the 3rd of July.
Wow.
So how American is that?
Yeah, close enough. Growing up, did you have, well, let me put it this way. When you were a kid, and I mean like elementary school, what were the things that you were most passionate about, as a boy?
I think it was baseball, sports.
Okay.
I actually grew up our parish was St. Joseph, patronage of St. Joseph on Georgia and Raymond, hard in Detroit. It was pretty much split between Italian and Polish, Ventimiglia, Scalisi, Provenzano, Talaska, Tobolski. Those were all, my classmates through grade school. And it was really cool. My best friend is a man by the name of Tony Milano. And ironically, this is really bizarre. Tony wound up working for decades at Selfridge Air Force Base, which is the Air Force Base where Colonel Carroll was the day he took off in that jet. And we'll get back around to that. It was so bizarre. He got in touch with me on Facebook. I'm plowing through this book. Unfortunately, he got me some materials that were too late and didn't make it into publication. So if I ever revise that, I will include some of the stuff that Tony got me. But how bizarre is that? Of all the gin joints in all the world, my grade school best friend worked at Selfridge Air Force Base for decades. It's mind-blowing.
I love coincidences like that. They're kind of the universe's gentle way of tapping you on the shoulder to remind you that all is not chaos and there is an organization to the universe if we take a moment to smell the flowers. By the time that you mastered reading and could get beyond Dick and Jane books and the world of reading and the potential of reading what we'd call grown-up books opened up for you, what kind of books were you attracted to, or were you much of a reader at all?
It's really strange. In grade school, I read a lot of sports biographies. And so I wanted to find out, how did they get from A to B? And there was a very famous baseball player by the name of Frank Tanana. And Frank Tanana was a Detroit product. I knew him. I knew of him, and only because his high school and my high school, I went to De La Salle High School in Detroit when it was located there. I played, I was trying to make the junior varsity baseball team. And Frank Tanana, they arranged for our squad, which was the wannabe guys, to play the junior varsity from Catholic Central. What we did not know is that the other coach was going to let some of his varsity players pitch against us because they needed to practice. And lo and behold, and I didn't learn this till after the fact, The guy on the mound was Frank Tanana, a future superstar for, I think it was the Los Angeles Angels, and I know he pitched for the Tigers. So in Detroit, because of the cold weather, it was a 3-ball, 2-strike count. It wasn't 4-3. So the first ball came at, and it literally sizzled. And I heard it hit that frozen catcher's mitt behind me. Strike one. So I had one more chance. So I thought, he's going to throw me another fastball. So I reared back, and I swung, and he threw me the slowest, laziest curve. I could have swung 4 times at that thing. And boom. And I mean, it came in like 3 feet. Boom. And it went in, well, I already swung, so I was out. So I had to ask later, we're on the bus in the back home. I go, who was that? Because I made my 8th grade baseball team as a 4th grader. Okay.
Wow.
So I was a baseball prodigy, if you will. Well, I thought I had never seen anything like this before in my life. And I found out later it was Frank Tanana, and he went on to be a pro. That ended any thought I had of becoming a baseball player. Because I said, man, if that's out there at the high school level, and so I know this takes me to books, but I didn't read that much because I was on the debate team at De La Salle.
Oh, great.
Yeah, the debate, the public speaking team. I was wallpaper for a couple of stage shows. So I was kind of into that. And I really wasn't much of a reader. But I was traumatized by the Tanana fastball and the curveball.
All I can think of is years after that point in your life, in my life, when I had the pleasure of working in management and off-Broadway theater in New York. I worked with wonderful actors, great actors, some who we know their faces but not their names, others who were Academy and Tony Award winners. And, any dreams I had had or fantasies about acting, which I pretty much ceased by the time I was 20, were totally vaporized at that point. This is a whole nother level of the game. And, playing with physics on pitches like that brings the point home. Were you much of a movie watcher?
We had a place called the Easttown Theater, and we were regulars. It was always like, the double features. And I'll remember, I wish I could remember the year, but I'd have to go back. I want to say 63 or 64. And in the middle of the 2 features was a short 2 or 3 minute clip, and it was titled Rolling Stones Gather No Moss. And it was a 3-minute clip of the Rolling Stones. And I was like, and of course, they're my favorite band. I've had nightmares of walking into an elevator without a autograph pen and, meeting Mick Jagger. Oh, no. But that's where I got introduced, was at the movie theater to the Rolling Stones. And, I've searched forever to find that clip. I have no idea, but they played that. And I was like, wow. I was probably 12 at the time. So I was born in 52. So 63,
rock and roll.
64. Yeah, rock and roll. But we always, every time the movies would change, it'd be 25 cents to get in. Your parents, I had 4 brothers and a sister, and it was always, get out of the house. Take this quarter and a pocket full of jujubes or something. And
a very different experience.
We were gone all day Saturday, I'm telling you.
That's great. Ray, do you remember at what point in your life, not that maybe it kicked in and changed your focus at that point, but when you first heard about this phenomena, flying saucers, UFOs, unidentified flying objects, is there a moment that you can locate where that first kind of came into your transom?
Yeah, it was January of 1973, and I was a cooperative education student from the University of Detroit. And they put me in an office with Al, and you'd mentioned him earlier. Al at that time, I think, was maybe a GS-11. So he was mid-level engineering, because you can take the engineering track up to a GS-15. So our building was a 2-story engineering building or business office connected directly to a 250-foot long hangar, airplane hangar, which, up until maybe the 60s was used to put maintenance on planes or, outfit them for tests. And then connected to the far side of that building was a twin 2-story office building in which was the Greasy Spoon or the coffee shop. So it's January, first week of my employment there. He says, hey, I'm going to take you there and get you a candy bar, kind of a welcoming gift. And so we walk into this hangar, and as soon as we walk into this hangar, which is super dark, it's like 40 feet tall, and it's the lights are blanked out. The windows, which they have thousands of, are all blanked out by these heavy blue curtains. And so it's kind of dim and really spooky. And he turns to me and says, have you heard about our aliens?
Continue on.
And I said, I'm a 19-year-old co-op student from Detroit, okay? So I don't know aliens from Jack. And I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, in the 40s, there was a crash, and they brought the machine and their occupants here to Wright-Patterson for evaluation and exploitation. And so I'm thinking, well, okay, I got to ask, where are these aliens? He said, oh, they're kept in the tunnels. You mean we have tunnels? Yeah, we have tunnels that keep the aliens there. Well, can we go see these aliens in the tunnels? Well, no, I'm afraid we can't. Well, why not, Al? Well, because it's a secret. Well, Al, if it's a secret, how do you know about it? Well, what I come to learn, in the ensuing days and weeks, because this is a 4-month assignment. So I go and ask Doug, who, of course, knew Al and other people around that little building, hey, this is what Al told me. And they're all like, to a person, oh, yeah, they're kept in the tunnels. But what I didn't learn till later was, okay, this is 1973, and Project Blue Book had been there on the base for 20-some years, including Sign and Grudge, right?
Yes.
So everyone was well aware of the connection between Wright-Patterson, which was, areas A, B, and C, and we're in area B. And on the other side of the highway is area A, where FTD and Blue Book were. So it was well known. And if you go back to the Dayton Daily News, the local paper, there's articles almost, monthly, if not weekly, about what happened with Blue Book this week or Blue Book this month. So everybody was well versed in that connection. Yeah. And this maybe was an extrapolation of that. But my antennas went up. And that was the moment that they went up.
I'll be damned. Did you go from high school to university or go in the service, or what happened with your life at that point?
Well, De La Salle was a college prep high school, and like 99.75%, go to college. So, being one of 6 kids and not having a bunch of money, the University of Detroit took pity on me, and I give them a plug. It was a great, great, great school, still is.
Oh.
And they were well known for their engineering. And I had an uncle who worked for the Argonaut division of General Motors. Argonaut division was the guys who made these buy or build decisions, like buy a new plant or retrofit an old existing plant kind of thing. And he was into electrical stuff and electronics, and I used to hang with him once in a while. So I thought, wow, he's got a new car. My Aunt Helen was gorgeous, good-looking woman. Yeah, he's got a big house. I'm hip. I like that. Let's go see what this is all about.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah. So I went from De La Salle and I went to the University of Detroit, and it was a 5-year program because you got to squeeze in a year's worth of co-op in between, like every other semester after sophomore year. So I went from De La Salle to the University of Detroit, but in '73 is when I came to Dayton for that co-op. And when I graduated in 1975, they offered me a job. And I thought, well, the state of Michigan was still a mechanical town. They weren't really thinking about microprocessors in the cars yet. So this was the best opportunity to follow what I was interested in. And so I left Detroit, packed up, left a lovely girlfriend behind, unfortunately, and, came to Dayton, Ohio. Lovely Dayton, Ohio.
Wow. And when did you kind of make the transition from your engineering work to that moment that writers sometimes have of, I think I need to dig in, do the research, and write a book, my first book. What were the factors that brought you to that point?
It was actually a two-step process. And the first one is, and I have to thank her, bless her heart, Dr. Lynn Katai.
Yeah.
Um, it was 1997, and the years have gone by. I had two boys. I coached almost year-round. I coached indoor soccer. I coached softball during the summers. I coached fall and spring soccer for the recreation leagues. My boys both went on to play high school soccer. So, I did something correct.
Wonderful game.
Yeah, it was 1997, and that's when the Phoenix Lights came out.
And the 50th anniversary of Roswell and the modern age of UFO sightings and Kenneth Arnold, very auspicious year.
How about that? But this thing happened, and the trigger was, there was, I think he was a captain. He was a public affairs official at Luke Air Force Base, and they were scrambling to come up with an explanation, a debunking explanation. So first of all, they said, it was nothing. Then they said it was the flares. Then they said it was 10 jets in formation, and they kept changing it. And so maybe it was the third excuse. Well, at that time, we had what was called the GAL, the Global Access List. And what the GAL allowed me to do is once I had somebody's name and especially their location, I could find their email address on the GAL. So I looked at this guy's email address, and I sent him an email and said, hey, there's a handful of us here at Wright-Patterson. You've heard of that, Wright-Pat, right? Well, kind of given you're little old Luke and we're big old Wright-Pat, and we have this big history of UFOs, so don't try to pull any crap. I sent him an email that said, there's several of us that would like you to stop talking, because every time you do, you make those of us who really work for the Air Force look stupid.
Oh, boy. And
I never got a response. And it was at that point where I thought, oh, this is just too good. And, kind of the coaching was now behind me and that kind of thing. And, the kids were, I think, in high school at that point. I was still maybe doing one team a year. But I started to get back, and I reread books that I had once read. And I started to do some field work, go to famous sites like Exeter, for example.
Yeah.
And try to find old witnesses, which I did, and that's in my first book. But I started to do that and started to do some field things. And then the second point was, after all these years, I retired in 2011, and I wanted to go to a UFO conference. And I wound up going to the International UFO Conference, I think in 2012 or 2013.
Yeah.
And wow. It was transformative. And then after I heard some of these guys talk and I read some of the newer books, I go, man, I got some great stories these people would love to hear. And I thought it was important for people to know. Yeah. And that was the trigger point. So that's a long story, but that's how it all happened.
Can you provide an overview of the history between Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and UFOs, and how this history permeates the employees there? We've touched upon it, but do you believe this history that recovered flying saucers, UFOs, UAPs are actually reverse engineered there? And generally, your evidence to back up the opinion that you've ultimately come to, Ray?
Sure. That's a great question, Peter. There has been long a mythology that the aliens and the crash wreckage, starting with Roswell, came to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And it's interesting, if you go back and you look in time, there's only a handful of early newspapers, contemporary newspapers, to the July 1947 incident that said, and the recovered debris went to Wright Field.
Yes.
It wasn't widespread, but you can find a handful. So somebody made that statement. Now, fast forward to 1978 when Stanton Friedman interviews Jesse Marcel, who, as most everybody knows, was sent by Colonel Blanchard to go up to Corona and the Foster Ranch, pick up the debris, bring it back, and they evaluated it, put the headlines out, we got a flying saucer. So Marcel said more than once, but the first time was a video that Stanton Friedman did, and he said things like, we tested it, we tried to smash it, cut it, burn it, crimp it. It was like unlike anything I'd ever seen before. Yeah. It was not of this earth, and he concluded with, the material was sent to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And he actually gave the route. He said it, I escorted it to Fort Worth. General Ramey made me pose with them silly ass, the
weather balloon picture.
Yeah, the weather balloon. But it turns out that years later, the person who was chief of staff of the 8th Army Air Forces in Fort Worth and who handled the wreckage signed a legal affidavit that said a good deal of the material was sent to Washington for inspection. And then I think it was Deputy Chief of Staff of the Air Force was going to send it on his private plane to Wright Field. So 2 highly reliable people who actually handled the wreckage said in a legal fashion that wreckage went to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Yeah. That is absolutely undeniable, beyond debate. So we know it went there.
We were at the beginning talking about the tunnels. What else can you share with us about the base itself that would be of interest to our listeners that you are free to talk about that can substantiate in some way these rumors, these myths, these legends about the deep tunnels and vaults potentially containing other intelligences, beings from parts unknown?
Yeah, let's look at that. And let's complete the previous thought. Yeah, let's complete the previous thought. The previous thought is, what evidence is there that the materials were brought there? Well, the best evidence, as I mentioned, was the legal testimony of 2 of the individuals who were in the position to know where the materials went. And in fact, the Deputy Chief of Staff of the 8th Army Air Force was the person who made sure that the materials still in their possession got it to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So that's the best evidence that we have so far. The scenario under which the material would have been evaluated would make it much more difficult to actually prove that something happened. And if we look at that scenario, it was probably something like this. The material was divided in some proportion. Some went to Washington, D.C. as a detour before it went to Wright Field, and some of it remained back at Fort Worth and was eventually sent to Wright-Pat. But what I suspect happened is that some agency was given that material, hand carried it in a briefcase on a chartered flight or a Mil Air flight between Washington and Wright Field. And then with a phone call letting the right people know, they would have had a meeting with the local intelligence agents at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And in particular, they would have met with the scientist from the materials laboratory. Let's talk about that. In 2017, the materials laboratory, the Aerospace Materials Laboratory at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, celebrated 100 years on the base. So in 1947, these world-class aeronautical material experts had already operated on the base for 30 years.
Good
so
Lord.
Wright-Patterson, it would have been the logical place to take it because it had the technical expertise. It had the security clearances to keep everybody quiet. It had the secure facilities. It had the equipment necessary to do the evaluations. If they didn't have any of this, they had the money to do a quick and dirty contract and bring the people in or the equipment in or the expertise in or whatever was necessary to do the evaluation. The guys come from Washington. They bring a briefcase, and you recall Marcel said this stuff was mostly thousands of pieces, 2 inches by 3 inches in dimension. So you could fit 1,000 pieces in a briefcase, and it was real light, you could bend it. So they bring it in and they say, they got the director of the lab, some of his high-tech guys, and they say, look, we found this material. We're not sure. It could be a Russian spacecraft, but it was crashed. And here's the way we found it. We need you to assess this, and you need to tell us everything you can about this. So 6 months later, however long it takes them to do their assessment, they call the guys up in Washington, say, our report's ready. Guys from DC come in, grab the report, of which there would be only 1 or 2 copies. They'd be stamped, top secret, numbered, whatever. The guys who came from DC would say, this never happened. You all sworn to secrecy, and you are to forget about this. Don't ever call us. We're never going to call you.
Right.
Ordinarily, when a contractor or anybody does an assessment like this, or even in-house, there's a TR written, a tech report, and it's numbered and it's reviewed, and it's eventually put off, classified here, unclassified there. So a report, a smoking gun, would have been written, but we'll never know that. The guys who did all that work, obviously, they're long since gone. And unless, the guy who was in charge or one of the scientists kept his own copy, we don't know. So we only have the word of a general and the word of Jesse Marcel that the stuff came here. But we know it came here, and we know it was assessed here. But that, unfortunately, is where the trail ends. Now, you want to know about tunnels.
Please.
Don't be surprised. There are 600 buildings at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
Whoa, 600?
Over 600 and over 8,000 acres. So certainly there are steam tunnels everywhere. There are utility tunnels. There are tunnels that connect buildings. I worked in one, I know. They're just ordinary tunnels. Now, as you walk down the hall of these tunnels, there are vault doors there. It made it convenient. Those 2 headquarters or whatever they are, science building and headquarters, it makes it convenient when you want to have a classified discussion to go into this cleared area. So, do we need tunnels and vaults to have aliens and crash wreckage? Not really. I think that's just, it makes people tingle who haven't been in a classified environment before. Ooh, but we don't need that. And we don't need a hangar to have aliens. We don't need a hangar to bring the Roswell crash wreckage in. We just needed paper bags. I mean, thousands of little pieces.
Yeah.
That said, Wright-Patt would have been an excellent location for aliens. And you're going to ask me why.
Well, why?
Good question. Back in 1947, for example, they had a building here, and it was called the Regional Hospital. And that building, Building 219, is almost on top of the operational runway. So if a plane comes in with caskets, little caskets, like the Roswell story has, and they put them in a truck, it would take all of about 3 minutes to drive it from the airplane to this building, Building 219, which was the hospital. And that hospital had a morgue. It had an operating room. It had vaults. It had doctors and nurses and medical equipment and everything you would need to do an autopsy. So if, and this is a big if, and we can circle back around to this later, if alien bodies, dead or alive, were brought in, that building would have been the perfect building to do that kind of assessment, because doctors and nurses and medical people were coming in and out all day. I have pictures of that in 1947 with the ambulances out parked next to the building. So everything would have been perfect. In fact, it blows my mind when I hear stories, and of course they're all third person, or the plumber told his uncle who told his whatever that he saw these aliens being brought in. That's all poppycock. But it would have been perfect to be brought into this building because, the morgue, they can preserve bodies, things like that. there's no place to preserve a body in a hangar, especially on short notice. It doesn't make sense. So, yes, go ahead.
Is that physical building still there, Ray?
Absolutely. And I actually had office space in it for a short period of time. Absolutely. Yep. And there's
yeah. Is
there
that building now it's office space, has nothing to do with medical or anything of that nature anymore?
I'll share this with your listeners. That building at one time, as it went from the hospital to a pediatric clinic to business offices, for several years, that building housed employees from the Foreign Technology Division. FTD are the boys most closely associated with UFOs and ETs on the base. So
Yeah.
think about that. Second of all, when the Atlantic Paranormal Society, TAPS, the ghost hunters, they came to the base in 2008, and they had to choose among all the 600 buildings on the base to do their investigation. Building 219 was one of those buildings. In my research, I found a granddaughter of a woman who was named in a newspaper article, and she was giving her story of the hauntings that went on when she was a longtime employee there. I found her granddaughter and interviewed her, and her granddaughter told me she used to go into that building all the time with her granny and told me her own personal stories.
Can you share that story with us?
Well,
If it's not violating a confidence or a trust.
It's not. It's absolutely not. And in fact, I do a talk called Haunted Wright-Patterson. And when I did some of these in the fall, usually I do them live, but I had to do Zoom because of COVID. I met with this woman and we had lunch together, and she told me her stories because, you got to look somebody in the eyeballs to get it. And I was totally convinced, and she knew things. She had to have been in that building many times in the places she told me, because you can't guess at this. Or, her grandmother might have told her, but no, she knew too much. And so her grandmother told stories about hearing disembodied voices, seeing apparitions, having doors closed. The lady that I met, her name is Chelsea. She related stories like, at the time, her grandmother and only one other person were the evening maintenance people for the building, and they would lock the building so nobody could get in, and the people would have to ring them or knock or do whatever, get their attention to be let in after hours. Yeah. But it was for everyone's protection.
Yes.
So there was, because of it was a hospital at one time, the intercom system, Dr. Casey, stat, you're needed, operating room floor. Occasionally, the beeper would go off as if somebody was making an announcement on the PA system. And it would be totally dead except for the whoo, which gets everyone the attention. And Chelsea said she would, pick up a receiver to, because once you pick up a receiver, everyone could still hear the announcement over the speakers. So she could hear the beeping through the handset and coming over the loudspeaker. She'd hang up, and then maybe an hour later, it might happen again. And she quizzed her granny and the other lady, and they swore they had nothing to do with this. And she told me some other things about her personal encounters, but that's just one really, really good example that in the newspaper articles that were published or what TAPS did, that type of experience or haunting was never mentioned. Chel's story is unique to that whole, whatever's gone on in that building.
Ray, from your writing, from your presence, from hearing some of your talks on YouTube, you strike me as a pragmatist. You're an engineer. I'm always thankful when I learn that somebody has a background in engineering and has gotten involved in UFO studies. We need every engineer we can get. Rational skepticism is crucially important in our work. And you brought up a very important point, and one that intrigues a lot of people, which is the potential of a relationship of some sort between specifically UFO-related research, studies, phenomena, and the more esoteric world of the paranormal, ghost spirits, hauntings, other presences. Is this something that you have researched, or it's something that just sort of has intruded on your work occasionally? And in any case, do you feel that if there is a connection between these phenomena, that it is grounded in science or something that we can ultimately rationally wrap our heads around, or that it is a compounding of mysteries that you don't have a theory or an idea or a structure around?
Yeah, let's look at two things. Let's look at ghosts and extraterrestrials, and I'll start with the ETs first. This was in December of 2011. I was driving away from the base, coming home. So I was driving southbound on a highway that's 2 lanes north, 2 south, and it's only about 45 miles an hour. But as I'm coasting towards a light, it was I think the 5th of December 2011. We had one of those very strange cloud days where the clouds are only about 50, 100 feet off the ground. And it was just pea soup. It was clear, but you could, it was clear from 100 feet down, but 100 feet up, you couldn't see anything. And I caught something through the moonroof of my car. And, I thought, well, it's an airplane, because I'm literally at that point of driving. I'm 2 miles from Wright-Patterson, and I'm leaving them in my rear view mirror. So I'm thinking, oh, maybe it's a plane coming into the base to land. It's not abnormal. But I didn't hear anything. And I thought, oh, no, you're half deaf anyway, and your windows are rolled up. But those cargo planes are loud, and they'll shake your car. So I looked down through my windshield, and what I saw was a craft that I eventually was able to estimate was about 90 feet across.
Whoa.
And it was silent. I saw it for about 7 or 8 seconds. And I'm getting goosebumps because something happened this week, and I'm going to show it to you. So I saw this thing, and I was like, oh my God. And it was going in the direction that I was going. It could have been more than 50 feet over this 2-story building. That's how low it was. And I was like, oh my God, it's going to crash. And there's going to be this massive explosion. But by the back end of it, I knew, and there's no sound, that it wasn't an airplane, but I was still frightened. So I'm driving like this, looking through the windshield, trying to get another view, thinking, sure, it's got to hit these freaking trees that are right here. It's going to hit the trees. But it disappeared. And I went home, and I was like hypnotized. And if you'll give me 1 second to get up and grab a folder and a picture, I'm going to show you. I went home and I drew this thing, and I don't know why. And do you know that almost instantaneously, I lost that piece of paper? This would be 10 years now, and it only reappeared in my office this past week.
Go get it.
I will show you what I drew when I got home. So dead air for 30 seconds.
Yeah. I can't recommend Ray's books strongly enough. He's a wonderful writer, a great storyteller, and he really does his homework. And in his most recent book, the one with the wonderfully irreverent title of Swamp Gas My Ass, we get to meet an extraordinary gentleman, a great military presence, who we'll be discussing at length in the second half of the show. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I found this. I have a Stanton Friedman gray basket here. It's a huge container, and I put stuff in there, and there have been papers in there for years. And so I was just pulling everything from everywhere, putting it in there and saying, it's winter, I'm going to go through this. This is the original drawing on the original piece of paper. And again, it was lost for 10 years. This was my first impression of what the back of that craft looked like.
Yeah. Holy shit.
Now, don't pay any attention to this because I don't know what I was doing there. But that back end is what it looked like. And as you can see, this is just a scrap of paper that was handy. These were on my desk. And this is the craft. And I was able to determine how, the dimensions of it, because I recall, I said, well, it's this high. And I recall seeing what its relationship was to this cake store or whatever. A Subbies was in there, and it's a small 2-story building. Carpet store was in there. And I just drew this as a reminder.
Ray, I want to jump in just for a moment and say, as a trained artist, there is this very special place in my heart for witness drawings, the immediacy thereof in certain cases, or that serious laboring by somebody who is not trained to, draw or paint, who knows that this is really important. And whether or not they're doing it in a hurry just to get it down, or taking their time based on the memory of what they just saw and change their life, there's a specialness to them. And I've never seen one quite like that.
Oh, thank you. I have no artistic talent. It's absolute zero, but I put that down, and I was able to recall the shape and everything. Mm-hmm. But do you know, for 6 months, every time I thought about that craft, one, I couldn't find the drawing, and two, I couldn't recall any details. And then 6 months to the day, I wound up getting a random email from somebody whom I had worked on a project with before I retired. And whatever it is they said, because it was a very special project, I might add, it erased the block. And I had as much recall as possible about that event and where I was and where I was coming back from and time of day and everything. But for 6 months, every time I would sit down to write something about it, I would just wind up staring at the keyboard and going, I have no idea why I'm sitting in front of this keyboard. And then 6 months later, something popped, or who knows? I'm not smart enough to know.
Well, I think, that is one of those areas where there are factions. One faction claims that and we know for a fact as well as we can, that they can affect our thinking, create screen memories, block memories, bring them to the fore, adjust them, so to say, fine-tune them, or the human mind itself, without any assistance from them, can follow some of the same functioning. And I guess when we're ready to deal with certain things, in some cases, they do make themselves available. And I guess in other cases, it's a combination. I know that I don't know for sure what it is, but both of those aspects and factors do come into play. When you studied engineering, Ray, what was your hyper specialty, the area that you really were most interested in, that you worked in, that specific area of engineering in your professional life?
Well, if you would just give me 1 minute, I'll finish up the alien ghost thing.
Well, we actually have about 2 minutes or so before we go to break, but continue on.
Great. So that was the alien aspect. The ghost aspect was I was in Gettysburg to do a talk to the Air Force Research Lab corporate board. They broke to do a thing. I had the evening off, and I went and took photos. The next morning, I was going to drive from Gettysburg to Washington, D.C. to do something else that week. But in that morning, when I went back to Gettysburg National Military Park and then left on the southernmost exit to get on Highway 15 to go towards D.C., I was only on that highway for maybe 2 minutes, and I looked to my right, and there was a full-bodied apparition of a gentleman dressed in a Union costume, if you will, a Union uniform, and it stayed with me in my car for 30 minutes.
All I can only add there, having first visited Gettysburg with my grandmother and my sister Helen when I was 12 years old, you don't have to be some kind of sensitive or psychic to get that this is one of the most loaded pieces of real estate in America. I mean, there is so much going on interdimensionally there, and I'm not prone to saying things like that, but I have heard so many credible accounts from credible witnesses over the decades that I can only say I hope you enjoyed your drive with this gentleman.
Oh, it's crazy. I'm working a new project, and I'm going to put all the details in there. Yeah, so
Amazing.
Ghosts and aliens, when you have those kinds of experiences, then you don't have to guess, if it's just who or what is where you're pushed forward to. So I never would have probably written a book on aliens without my sighting, and I probably never would have, I sat on that Gettysburg story for 12 years. My wife and my kids still don't know. And unless I write a book about it, they may never know, or they watch your show. But I sat on that story for 12 years before I dared tell anybody about it.
I appreciate that. In that, one of the ways that debunkers try to get to credible researchers, oh, you're into UFOs, are you into ghosts too? Are you into reincarnation? And try to just belittle the whole thing. On that note, this is Peter Robbins with my special guest, Raymond Szymanski, and we will be back to continue our discussion in about 3 minutes. Stay with us.
Hey members, the new KGRA-DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA-DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA-DB.
Welcome to the new KGRA digital broadcasting website, thekgradb.com. Here you'll find great new content, including the KGRA Classics, great shows from our archives. You'll be able to see the show times and information so you can see what show is currently on air. The on-air live button, so just go to this section and you'll be able to hear the show live with exceptional sound quality. We also have the Vault section. Make sure to subscribe to get access to great content and special features. We have the make content for our latest news and events, so make sure to sign up and you can be part of our forum. So make sure to check out the new KGRA digital broadcasting website, thekgradb.com. We look forward to seeing you there, and we hope that you enjoy the new website.
I don't want to talk about it.
I don't want to talk about it.
Families don't have to talk about everything, but they should talk about how to plan for an emergency. Get tips and resources to make your family's emergency plan.
Discover the Observation Deck, a one-of-a-kind virtual event platform that takes video conferencing to the next level by using avatars to navigate a campus. There's so many areas and activities to choose from. There's a 1,000-seat auditorium, an expo hall, a nightclub, and even a beach. So come attend a conference, take a class, or hear a lecture on the incredible Observation Deck campus. Go to theobservationdk.com.
And welcome back to Meanwhile Here on Earth with Peter Robbins and my guest, Raymond Szymanski. Ray, let's pick up where we left off there for a moment. Many years ago, when I was basically obsessed with investigating the Rendlesham Forest UFO incident, I stayed at a wonderful bed and breakfast in Suffolk, a few miles away from the events in question. The owners of that B&B, Jan and Tony Warnock, became lifelong friends, as did their sons, and they are like family to me. That house had a presence and a history of the presence. And although I never experienced it directly, the accounts that I got were extremely credible from people that I had a great deal of trust in. And none of that information was included ultimately in Left at East Gate. And I didn't talk about it much for many years either, just with that defensive notion of, oh boy, he's into ghosts too, and probably into telekinesis and reincarnation and, you know, ancient thises and that's. Well, to a degree, I am. I'm a curious person with a lot of interests, and I expect you are too. But it's been somewhat satisfying over the past few years to see how ridicule relative to the subject of UFOs has decreased. It really has had the air knocked out of it since late 2017. And people in areas that we would have not imagined a few years ago, military, intelligence, education, academia, journalism, politics, are now speaking out about the subject without worrying about, you know, having their careers messed with or being made fun of, or generally being seen as cranks, because this is now mainstream. How has this change over the past few years impacted on you as a public person and your work to any degree?
Really zero. And the reason is, you know, I didn't do this actually to write a book. Now I've written 3, very strange. I just did it because I wanted to satisfy my own curiosity. Here I had this guy, named Al, and he told me this, and all the other people, and then, you know, you dig in, and as I said, it was kind of, I got into it really late doing the field research. So I'm a pretty good, you know, judge of information, I think, and to me, it was a no-brainer, and I knew I was right. I had a friend from college. We had a 4-person team for a couple of years, and there were 2 mechanical engineers, 2 electrical engineers, and we did all the labs together. And one day, his name was Paul Savanich, and Paul said, and it was something that happened in the lab, and he goes, "Ray, I got to tell you, when you're wrong, you're dead wrong. but when you're right, you're obnoxious." So I just knew that this whole UFO thing, you know, there was just too much smoke happening where I was working and things that I heard and knew. And, you know, I just knew it had to be true. So to me, it didn't impact me. In fact, I dragged a lot of people along, guys that were members of the senior executive service, for example. I was told that I would be given some metals to test if I could get the Air Force Materials Directorate, the same ones who 70 years ago did the Roswell stuff,
Oh boy.
if I could convince them. And, having been working in the lab for nearly 40 years, I still had a bunch of friends. And so I tried to go bottom up, and that didn't work, working with engineers. So I contacted some of my old SES friends and went top down, and they were buds with the head of the Materials Directorate. And because those guys, those two SESs who were trying to intercede on my part, they wanted to know. So, it wasn't this hocus pocus stuff. Not everyone thought that. And this was proof. And they go, yeah. So they cornered the acting director at that time of the Materials Directorate. And he thought about it. And the answer that they got and gave back to me wasn't, oh, you guys are crazy and there's no such as UFOs. Unfortunately, they were so tied up doing analysis and other work for the alphabet soup agencies that they couldn't squeeze it in, and they couldn't justify it in case there was an inspection because there would be no paper trail. So how would you guys, account for, 50 hours of these guys on a machine and there's no contract number or whatever. So they were denied on well, we would really love to do this, but our hands are tied kind of a response, which was that blew me away. And this was a member of the senior executive service who was helping me. So kind of a lot of points to get your head around there. Not everybody on the base was thinking this was poppycock.
You have such a long history in this work. And on the base, I can only imagine that as time passed and your interest was noted unofficially and officially as time passed, and you published your first book, your second book, third book, again, much more recent. Did you ever come to feel that there was interest in you that you could have lived without, that was potentially problematic, even dangerous or uncomfortable for you?
From my friends' basis, it was always, hey, this is great. We need somebody like you doing this type of work. So
Good.
there was a lot of support from everyone, including these two former members of the senior executive service who went to bat for me. And people would call me and say, we need to have lunch, man. I got something I need to tell you.
Bravo.
And so they did. I had lunches. Things happen that, I could say might be coincidental. It seemed like every time I wanted to upload a book for publication to Amazon, and you got to go through a process and you upload it, and then they tell you if everything's grammatically correct, blah, blah, and then, okay, thumbs up. And let me pause here. The reason I self-published, even though I had some interest from publishers, that I contacted people in the UFO community, like Richard Dolan, for example, talking to him about publishing. When I contacted the literary office for the Air Force in New York City, and there is one of those, they're the people responsible for clearing books of former government employees, Air Force employees that held security clearances.
Sure.
Well, back in 2015, just prior to the first publication, they told me that if I had a publishing contract, somebody was paying me to write this book, they would be legally obligated to review it, and they were 1 year behind in reviewing books.
Oh, boy.
And they told me it was a minimum of 12 months. So she said, now tell me again, do you have a publishing contract? And I said, no, I don't. So I found CreateSpace or whatever they were back then.
Oh.
For the last book, and there was a transition period. Now for the last book, there is a change. Before, there was some, publishing contract, no publishing contract. Now, the law says if you had a security clearance for the Air Force, you have to get this thing reviewed. And so I was fortunate enough, to make some friends, and it went through the process much faster. But if you have a publishing contract, they are going to look at it with a fine-tooth comb. And so Do I miss it? I don't care if I'm published or not published by somebody. That's never been my thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's how the books, have come about, and that's why I self-published. And I don't know why I went off on that. What was your question, Peter? I'm so sorry. Was I ever interrupted by intelligence agencies?
Pretty much.
Strange stuff has happened to me every time I try to upload one of these books. Like my internet would go out, or it would get halfway through uploading, a 29 meg document, and it would burp. And on 3 occasions, I had to have my carrier's tech people come over and try to explain these problems I was having. Not a single one of these tech experts could figure it out.
So
Yes.
These problems seem to go beyond the world of coincidence and gee whiz, I'm having a problem at the same time I did last time I tried to upload a book.
It always happened like that when I was in max crucial time. And it's like they knew they had a anxiety sensor in my office, and they go, oh yeah, he's got to upload this. Let's crash his system. And there were some other strange things, telephone calls that I'm sure sounded like they were, being tapped, but no one. Only in one instance did somebody suggest that I not become too popular. Other than that, everybody from the military that I've known, civilians that I've known from the Air Force, everybody has been extremely supportive.
Great. I had wanted to hear that, and I'm gratified that has been the case. And it's the exceptions to the rule that have been a little awkward or unnerving at times. Please remind me, the first of your books was 50 Shades of Grey or Alien Shades of Grey?
It was originally 50 Shades of Greys. And then I got a surprise communique from those smutty, pornographic 50 Shades of Greys
right
peddlers who said, there's a distinct possibility. And this was like 2 years after my book had been out. They said, there's a distinct possibility that somebody might mistake your book about UFOs and extraterrestrials with our book about unbridled sex. So
right.
Would you consider making a name change? And and so I found out who the attorneys were, and I researched who they were, and I went, holy Schmittenhausen. They've got like 500 attorneys in a building in Germany and outposts everywhere. And I said, you know what? And I contacted an attorney, and he said, look, you would win in a court of law because they would have to prove that you harmed them. And you made $300 on the book, and they make $50 million a year. So their case is going to be thrown out. He said, however, they have 500 attorneys who are just sitting around waiting, to crucify a guy just like you. So you could win, but why don't you just change the title?
Right.
So I'm okay with that, and that's how that. That's the original
from
one.
Here
to Alien Shades, yes. And I probably sent you the wrong one, but that was Victoria's Secret Truth, which I really love the book because the person involved. But that's what happened.
Talk about what readers can look forward to finding in that book.
Which of the three do you want me to talk about? First, second, or third?
The first, Alien Shades.
The first book, and there were 4 people who wrote endorsements for that book, by the way. They got to read it. And it was Yvonne Smith. Everyone knows Yvonne as the hypnotic therapist. Preston Dennett, Paul Davids, who, of course, gave us Roswell, and the erstwhile Nick Pope. And Nick wrote that it's this fabulous travel adventure, and it's going to start a few conspiracy theories. It had great inside info. And I think Nick, I couldn't have wrote a better description of it, but that's basically what it is. I was just trying to prove to myself, going around doing this field research, contacting people who had first-person experience. Like, I spent an afternoon with Travis Walton at the site of his abduction, and we took photographs which wound up in the movie Travis that was done by Jen Stein.
Right.
And what it basically indicates strongly is that the tree growth in there is very anomalous, and it's all in a singular direction, and that was where the craft was hovering all those years ago, and others have confirmed this.
Yeah.
So,
and I have to jump in here and say,
please.
As an associate producer of that wonderful documentary and the person that actually introduced Jennifer and Travis and got the project rolling, that physical evidence and those wonderful photos of the tree rings close up are, for me, as somebody that's been involved in this field for decades, one of the most shatteringly powerful, undeniable representations of the kind of proof that you could put somebody in jail with for the rest of their life if it was transposed, in terms of its power, its authenticity, the inability to muck around with it. It's as good as evidence gets, and you captured it wonderfully in those pictures.
Well, thank you. It was a wonderful experience. I wrote all about that afternoon with Travis. We had lots of fun. There's a lot in the book that Travis told me I promised I wouldn't say. So maybe a deathbed confession from one of us. You'll find out some really cutesy things. So then
Don't hurry on that.
Oh, good. So, I spent the day with Travis. I contacted people like Burroughs and Pennison and Halt, and I had conversations with them regarding Rendlesham. I went to Rendlesham, did my own investigation. I went to Exeter, the famous 65 sightings, the book Incident at Exeter, which was written about it. And I found the guy whose father is written up in the book, and he was living in the farmhouse over which the famous incident happened. So I spent the afternoon with him, and he introduced me to other witnesses who did not come forward. So some of their testimony is in my book. And for me, it was like a coming of age story where I finally realized that the harder I dug, and I was like this in the middle, aliens, great. No aliens, I'm good with it. I just wanted to know the truth. And it was this journey that took me, all over the country and into Europe. And it came out to me that there is really something to this. The firsthand witnesses that I talked to and the evidence that I saw and some evidence I uncovered, it just made it a no-brainer.
Yeah. There is something. It's hard to explain if you haven't been there. But when that bug bites you and you become obsessed in an organized, creative way and begin to document these accounts and lay in the evidence and find that you are creating a cogent picture that not only resonates for you, but that you're confident will do the same for readers. It's a very exciting thing. And I think a lot of people think of, basic research and writing and rewriting and, sitting down and recording something and transposing it is kind of boring, but it's anything but. It can be electrifyingly exciting.
Oh, absolutely. And when you find a way to present truthful information in a way that makes it palatable. For example, everybody's got their own twist on Roswell. And so there's certain facts you shouldn't put in there because they're debatable. Others you need to because, they've been proven. What I wanted to do when I finally decided to write this book, and it was very strange. The moment I knew I was going to write the book is I was at the International UFO Congress in whatever year, 14. And that's when Travis and I, from the conference, went to his site. I was already up in Heber, and he came to meet me because he was finishing up some business. When we came back down the mountain that day, that's the moment I realized that, man, I got this Wright Pat stuff. I got this Rendlesham stuff. I got this Exeter stuff. And I can make it entertaining because I knew that this topic isn't very palatable for most people. So I tried to make it funny. And in fact, Preston Dennett, in his endorsement said, "This is laugh out loud funny stuff."
At times it really is. These are not gratuitous laughs. It's the damn nature of the work. It can be dark and anxiety provoking. At one moment you turn a corner and it's hysterical. It is laugh out loud because that's the nature of life and nature of research and the nature of the subject as well.
When I don't think I put this moment in the first book. It was Travis. So Travis meets me. A little background, because I think your listeners would find this interesting. Travis is still at the conference in Fountain Hills, Arizona. I'm up in Heber. It's snowing to beat the band. And Travis is down there, and I have to convince him that Jen told him he had to come up and meet me, and we'd make an arrangements. I've already been up there a couple of days, and so he's got to come. Now's the time. Well, it started to snow, and I went, crap, he's going to get caught in the pass or something. So I'm on the phone with Travis, and he says, but I can't come up, man. It's snowing. And I'm looking out, and there's 8 inches of snow on my rental car. And lying like a government guy can, I said, Travis, there is not a flake of snow coming down up here. And I was just praying for him the next couple of hours that he wouldn't go off the road because I knew he was going to, So he gets there, and of course, we get in my rental car. We drive out. We do our thing. We're there for a couple of hours, and we come back to the hotel. And just before we're going to, do a bathroom break and then go eat at this restaurant, we get into my hotel room in Heber. I close the door. I'm walking to the bathroom. He gets up and puts the lock on, the chain lock on my door. And I'm thinking, what is about to happen here? Because we're only in for 5 minutes and use the rest facilities. And it didn't hit me until I got into the bathroom and, could think clearer. Travis was abducted just 10 miles from where we were sitting.
That's right.
And the man was we had just left his abduction site, and he was probably feeling a little bit vulnerable and went, they ain't taking us from this room. And he put the chain across the door, and I was like, oh, now I get it. But that was a very strange moment, Peter.
Yeah. Not that the chain would have necessarily helped if it was going to come to pass, but that force of habit for people that have had the kind of experiences that you and I have not, but are extremely familiar from study, documentation, and hearing so many credible accounts from credible people. Finally, all of your research and your work culminates in the research, writing, rewriting, and publication of a truly remarkable book where we not only get to continue to hear your voice and see your work, but we get to meet a truly unforgettable individual. And this is the book, and the true exploits of 2 Air Force pilots who intercepted the Michigan swamp gas UFO, North Korean MiGs, and Russian nuclear bombers. Ray, tell us about the gentleman who is central to this book, who passed, sadly, not that long ago, but who now lives in my mind and my thoughts, as he will in anybody who reads this remarkable book.
The hero of the story is Colonel Gary Kent Carroll. He was born and raised in Ohio outside of Columbus. His father was a program manager that developed one of the most unique jet bombers ever in the history of aviation. And so I guess Gary was kind of doomed to be a pilot.
That's one way to put it.
He graduated. And the way it started is his father hosted the weekly poker games, and Gary would be like giving him snacks and stuff. And he got to meet and through the years talk to all the guys, all the test pilots, many famous pilots. And so that kind of got into his blood. Aviation was in his blood. His uncle was a general. In fact, an auditorium at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is named after his uncle. So he goes to Ohio State, decides to get a degree there. He's enrolled in the Air Force ROTC. He eventually gets commissioned. He's sent off to flight school. By the time it's all said and done, Colonel Carroll has over 5,000 hours flying America's finest jets.
Wow.
That's a lot of time.
Yeah.
And in 1966, he was assigned to Selfridge Air Force Base. Now, you talk about a small world. I grew up in the northeastern part of Detroit. And then after the Detroit riots, we moved in 1966. We moved to East Detroit, which was even closer to Selfridge Air Force Base. Now I'm like 20 miles as the crow flies from Selfridge. And in 1966, he was assigned there to the 71st Fighter Interceptor Squadron. If your viewership is not familiar with the story, I'd like to tell it in brief form.
Please do. We have plenty of time, and that was, for me, going to be one of the highlights of the second hour of the show.
That's great. I'm looking at the time, and yeah, we're doing great. And I'm from Detroit. I talk fast. We could get 3 books in the next 28 minutes. So we'll set the scene. It's 1966, and it's March of 1966. The Washtenaw County Sheriff's Office is inundated with calls. Now, Washtenaw happens to contain Ann Arbor, Michigan, which
I'm going to cut you off for 1 second and ask Bill, our producer, to give you full screen for this account.
Okay, great.
If you would, Bill. Though he may be busy doing whatever else he's doing.
When he does go to full screen, I have a visual.
I can do the magic myself.
Okay, great.
Oh, no, that's me.
That's looking good. Okay.
Well, thank you.
Well, halfway there.
Well, continue on for the moment. If I can figure it out, I will.
Okay, fine. It'll be magic. So it's 1966. They're having not a heavy winter. It's a little bit warmer than usual. And Ann Arbor is in Washtenaw County. Now, if you're from Michigan, you'll understand this. We always put up our right hand, and the people go, "Oh, you're from Michigan? Yeah, where do you live?" "Oh, I live up here." Well, we don't use a map. So right here in the southeastern corner of Michigan is where Washtenaw County and Ann Arbor is.
Okay.
Your Michigan viewership, they're going nuts right now. They're loving it. So all of these calls are coming in, and there happens to be a gentleman by the name of William Tremel, Treml, and he works for the Ann Arbor News. He also happens to be the police beat writer. So he'd come in 5 o'clock in the morning, get some coffee going, and contact the different police agencies, the sheriff's office, Dexter, Chelsea, Ann Arbor, Washtenaw County, the city of Milan. I'm trying to remember the other 2 counties there. He'd contact them and say, "Hey, got some hot stuff for me?" And then he would massage it, investigate it, and he'd write an article. And then that afternoon or that evening, it would get published in the Ann Arbor News, the afternoon or evening edition. So it's about the 14th of March, and he's contacting all of these entities, and he's getting this consistent story. Police officers, many that he's known, and they're super troops, they're all reporting lights in the sky. Some are reporting objects, silvery objects, and they're doing crazy things. And these aren't short sightings. Some of the officers are watching these through binoculars for 3 hours. And it's all in this 3-county area, but the centroid is just to the northwest and west of Ann Arbor. So the best reports he's getting are from the police he knows the best, especially the Washtenaw County Sheriff's Office. So on the 14th of March, 1966, this 4-column, very information-dense article comes out in the Ann Arbor News saying all of these police, and they're naming names, filed reports with their home station saying, boss, this is what we saw. And then it continues 3 days later, another flurry of reports come in. Meanwhile, Tremels got his finger on the pulse of this stuff, and he's collecting information. There's onesies and twosies. But 14 March, boom, dozens of police officers. 17 March, boom, dozens of police officers. Now comes the 20th of March. On the Frank Manor farm, just outside the city of Dexter, Frank Manor's son-in-law, Frank had 10 kids, some of whom were married, living north of his property. His son-in-law calls the Washtenaw County Sheriff and said, "You're not going to believe what I'm saying. There's these 4 lights, and they happen to be over my father-in-law's farm. And in fact, I think some of these are over his house." So they approached the area from where the son-in-law is from the north. Meanwhile, Frank Manor and his son heard the dogs barking. They don't know his son-in-law's called us in. They're out on their property watching these lights go through, and Frank and his son get close enough where they can describe this thing, where the lights were, what the pattern were of the lights, the colors, where they were on the object, and the object's skin itself. They describe it as tearing the face off of a cardboard box in that waffle look. So they got a very close, couple 100 feet away view. Frank Manor's wife gets on, calls the sheriff, and they go, "Hey, we're on our way. We got guys already up there, on the north end of the property." By the time it was all over, on the 20th of March, dozens of police officers were converging from the north and the south through the swamp woodland, along with about 40 other people who had heard it through the grapevine, were all dispersed, and they were watching these lights go through these woods. Well, one of the officers who had stayed behind that didn't enter the woods was named Honeywell. And while all of this Keystone Cop stuff was going on the Frank Manor property, the 4 UFOs exited, stayed stationary over the Honeywell patrol car, did a little spin around the neighborhood, and took off to the northeast at a high speed, whereupon when they all got their collective heads together and they decided, yep, that's when we lost them in the woods. That's when we heard them disappear. So now the 20th, as if that wasn't enough, on the 21st, the very next day, about 70 miles to the south of Dexter at Hillsdale College, 90 co-eds from a couple 100 feet away at McIntyre Hall were watching UFOs hover over the adjoining arboretum. And they called, because this guy's wife worked at the university, they wound up calling a guy who was the head of the civil defense. And collectively, they watched this object hover for 3 hours.
Wow.
And police were called in. They watched it. They filed reports. So now over a span of a couple of weeks, all of these police officers, including the sheriff himself, who saw a bedded down area the next day where the manor said that the UFO had landed.
Good Lord.
So what do you think the Air Force did when they found out about this? Who do you think they sent? Dr. Hynek.
Of course.
So on the 22nd of March, Dr. Hynek arrives with 2 guys, 2 sergeants. They actually arrived separately, but Hynek winds up at the home of one of his professor friends from the University of Michigan from the astronomy department.
Right.
And Hynek spends the next 2.5 days trying to come up with a solution to this. So
when you say a solution, let's remind our listeners and viewers that this is still 4.5, 5 years before Dr. Hynek is honest with the world and admits that he has been an operative for the American intelligence community to help debunk the subject of UFOs. And I think in great part, it was a absolute reaming out that he got from Professor Dr. James McDonald at the University of Arizona not that long before his depression caused him to take his life. I think it was the big turning point in Hynek's professional life, but at this point, he was still, working for the man and trying to come up with, well, in this case, one of the most ridiculously insulting excuses for the real phenomena: swamp gas my ass.
So Hynek had 2.5 days, and he had to be selective because there was the pressure. Gerald Ford was the one who was putting a lot of pressure on. He was the minority leader. He
was the hero at this point.
He was, and then there was another guy, Weston Vivian, who was the rep for the area that Ann Arbor was in, who was calling Hynek every day personally for updates. So there was a lot of, he wasn't calling Hynek, he was calling Major Quintanilla back at Wright-Patterson for updates. And then, of course, Quintanilla passed that pressure on to Hynek. So Hynek
Blue Book is, of course, still in effect. We still have another 2 years to go.
That's right. Blue Book had another 3 years to go because they went out of business in December of 69.
69, right.
So a lot of pressure, and Hynek met every evening to decompress, maybe have a beverage with his buddies that he was staying with, an astronomer. And they met in groups, like 12, 13 faculty members from U of M. One of those recommended the swamp gas excuse. That's where Hynek got it from. And so the next day, the last day that he was in the sheriff's office, the Washtenaw County Sheriff's Office, he got a call from Washington, went into the sheriff's office, took the call, and then told the sheriff, I know I told you that I didn't know what it is, but we've just determined that it's swamp gas. And Sheriff Harvey actually went on the record saying, that's BS, because 5 minutes beforehand, I'd asked him and he told me he didn't have any clue what it was. He gets his call from Washington. Now it's swamp gas, like instant.
Good for the sheriff for calling him on that.
So he calls him on it. And then on the 25th of March, Dr. Hynek was supposed to have a small press conference at Selfridge Air Force Base, but Selfridge was too smart for this. They went, get off me, ball. We're not having this. And they arranged for a massive conference at the Detroit Press Club where there were 60 people, national news, local news, Canadian news, anybody and everyone who could get in there, because they held it at Selfridge. Only a couple people had credentials to get on, but they wanted an answer and they wanted to see Hynek dance. So they did. And Hynek went there, and he even in his report threw Selfridge Air Force Base officials under the bus, saying, "What, they screwed me by making me do this," and whatever. So be that as it may, Hynek puts out this swamp gas explanation, and the rest is history. He took a lot of flack, and yeah, McDonald justifiably reamed him over that and everything else. But that's where basically it sat until about, I found Colonel Carroll in, let's see, this is 2022. So I found him in 2020, January of 2020. And, I told him who I was, and I told him who I thought he was. And he said, yeah, I've got a story I want to tell you. And it was the dance goes on, and I finally convinced him to meet with me and tell his story. And I will.
I'm going to jump in for one moment just to say one of the things that is so compelling about this wonderful book that you've written is, rather than try to do a treatment of his story, you let him speak for himself. And we have an opportunity to basically read the transcripts. And boy, are they conversational. There's nothing dry about this at all. And he emerges fully formed. I mean, you did a great service for him and for us by capturing how live and in the moment, and his account. So again, continue on, but thank you for that.
You're welcome. If you think I talk a lot, you never have the privilege to sit down with Colonel Carroll.
Yeah.
The man was a full bird. He had 30 years in service. He was the head of Air Forces Iceland. He was the head of the East Coast Air Defense at one point. He was in the group that was going to stop the Russian bombers from flying through Canada and bombing the continental United States. This man had
absolutely major player,
great responsibility. So he's assigned to Selfridge Air Force Base in 1966, and Dr. Heinet's busy telling the world that it's nothing but swamp gas. But there are too many reports in March of 1966 that are coming to the first responders, the fire people, Selfridge Air Force Base, the Battle Creek Control Center, police, sheriff. And it got to a point where a critical point where Selfridge Air Force Base decided to scramble their F-106 jets. Now, let me give your listeners a little bit of background. The 71st Fighter Interceptor Squadron were armed with F-106 fighters, the finest fighters in their inventory for 20 years. This shows you how good they were. They were nuclear capable.
Yeah.
They could contain a nuclear bomb. And the way that was going to be employed was they thought that the Russians were going to come over the pole, fly through lightly defended Canada, and just drop nukes on the U.S. with their long-range bombers. And the plan was for the United States to meet them somewhere that was only populated with moose and caribou, get on top of the bombers, let go of that nuclear bomb, and then get the hell out of there, because these things could do over Mach 2, and then let that nuclear shockwave destroy the whole fleet with one bomb. That was their plan. And Colonel Carroll was the guy that was going to deliver that bomb. So think about that for a minute. So they're scrambled in March with these nuclear-capable F-106s to go find out what is flying in southeastern Michigan.
Yeah.
About 40 minutes into their search pattern, they visually and on radar come upon a metallic silvery object.
At about what altitude is this?
I believe they were around 10,000 feet, 8 to 10,000 feet.
And what's the clearest description again that you can share with us about this object?
I actually have a 2-minute clip that if you can teach me how to play it, we can let your listeners hear Colonel Carroll describe what happened. And what happened is it's a testimony that I created with his help that he would read so he could summarize this for moments like this. But to answer your question, he said he got within a couple of miles of it, and holding the object out, between your fingers, that sort of thing. We went through that process, and we could determine based upon his evaluations of what his radar was telling him and what his eyeballs were telling him and the speeds and everything. We went through the process of estimating and then calculating the size of the object. So I think we did that math, and it's in the book. And I wish I could remember everything I wrote in that book. I don't, but I think it was about 90 feet. And the interesting thing is I had him draw it, and when he drew it, and then I went back to see what the eyewitnesses drew and that were published in newspapers. Yeah. They matched what he drew me 55 years after the fact, what he remembered, and what people had drawn in contemporary times were a match. And then I asked him, were you ever reading these articles? He goes, no, man. He goes, we did our thing. We got debriefed twice, but we had to go back to defending America.
That's right.
We weren't nobody except our intel guys interviewed us about this. It was just gone. It was here. It was gone. We did it. And the book talks about, did you ever talk to your to your fellow guys? You ever talk to the guy that was your wingman, Bob Nicholson, that day?
Yeah.
So it's laid out minute by minute, second by second, his chase of this thing, what he was thinking at the time, how he felt, his emotions, his technical things. And I did, like you said, I let Colonel Carroll tell the reader, bring everybody into the cockpit with him as all of this was going on. But I had to cross-examine him because I kept wanting to know more and more details.
It worked really well, Ray. You should be proud of yourself. What you did here was nothing less than follow your passion, follow the logic, recreate for the reader the excitement that you felt, and go back and not hold back of, gee, I feel a little awkward asking you about this, but could you just, this is the full picture as much as we can get. And I had a follow-up question on that, because some of the supporting witness testimony is phenomenal as well. How did you find the witnesses that you did find? Because we all have different ways of going about this. How did you do it?
I don't want to give away a trade secret. So,
tell what you're comfortable telling.
So the way I found Colonel Carroll was, it's kind of like any good researcher and reporter and things that you've done. It takes years of dedicated legwork, running things down, and then just catching a break. Yeah. And you go, that is the clue I needed to find this guy too. So that's the Colonel Carroll story. But once he told me about his wingman, he said, well, he had lost touch with the wingman, didn't know if he was dead or alive. And, the family, he gave me very, very limited stuff. And I just got online and I used some Air Force resources, and I used some archive resources, and I wound up finding the widow of Bob Nicholson, who was his wingman that day. And then, as luck would have it, I got information from her, and she put me in touch with her son, who's an Air Force Academy graduate. And I found him and I contacted him, and then through their kindness, they gave me a copy of Colonel Nicholson's memoirs.
Oh.
And so, I had what he had done. And the interesting thing is, it corroborates a lot of what Colonel Carroll had told me, because you know how that is. If my evidence is not a smoking gun, then the best evidence is corroborated testimony.
You got it.
And so through, and then it's a snowball effect, because Colonel Carroll, he knew he was dying of cancer. And he knew his time was limited. And that's one of the reasons he told me his story. Plus, before he would tell me anything, I had to give him copies of my books, because he wanted to know if I was legit. And he wanted to know how I was going to handle this whole, I chased a UFO, I held a secret for 55 years story.
Yeah.
So he quickly read it. And then, once I told Jacqueline Nicholson that I have Colonel Carroll's blessing, and then, she was skeptical. So I got her phone number. Of course, I gave it to him. They called, they reunited after decades. They swapped stories. And then it was pretty easy. The Nicholsons were then, in my corner.
You remind me, no matter how wild, how exciting, how exotic these other intelligence aspects of this kind of research are, the human component for me is still the most meaningful. Like a lot of people who get into this field when I was younger, I'm sure it's cookie cutter with so many of our colleagues, an obsession of who are they? Where do they come from? Why are they here? What powers their craft? Or, if it's more esoteric and like valet, then, what are the mechanisms of the ether and the more ethereal aspects of this. And at this point in my life and work, it's much more about the impact that we have on each other as people in researching this, our potential to bring the world closer, and in reuniting these two people. You did a service to them, especially with Carol, who was, courageously seeing the end coming at him and still, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead, living his life in no uncertain terms and not slowing down just because he knew he was going to die. Hey, we're all going to die. It's just a matter of time and, the drama or the scenario. So you've done something really remarkable here, Ray. You've told this important story. You've told it in terms that this great guy and this great man and this military personage worthy of tremendous respect has had an opportunity to go on the record. And I'll say it much in the manner that Stan Friedman was able to do with Jesse Marcel Sr. When he was in his late 80s, and give him an opportunity to go on the record and kick off this thing called Roswell Research. You've written a wonderful book here, and I can't recommend it highly enough. We have a couple of minutes to go. Any thoughts that you would like to share with our audience, big picture, small picture, anything at all relative to your work, the subject in general, where we stand right now in the evolution of it? It's all yours.
Well, here's my hopes. When I did Victoria's Secret Truth, which is a 2-year case study of a woman who's had contact her entire life, and her grandson, there you go, and her grandson who's had contact, it took me a year to convince Victoria to do the book because she was hesitant to put her story out there because she's a professional and she, works in a capacity where her face is out there in the work she does. But I told her that if we could put out a solid story and show her bravery, then other folks might come forward and say, wow, I thought I was the only one, and now I know that I'm not alone, and that sort of thing. And that has actually come true. I've had people, which blew me away, that I worked with for years, that after they saw this book, called me, met me, emailed me, and told me, I'm so glad you did this because I feel so much better about what I've gone through. Now with the second book, here we have a highly decorated military hero who knew that we were on the edge. And he kept telling me, man, we're on the edge with this, Ray. We're on the edge. And I'm thinking, don't worry about it. It's going to be okay. I'm the guy that's going to have to live with it. And we would laugh. And so I'm hoping that, and it's already begun, that people will reach out to me and others who were former military and who were told to shut their mouths will come forward with their stories that can be corroborated, that, can shed more light on this entire story. So I'm thinking that, why did I do this? It was entertaining. It was self-gratifying, but I think it's going to help people down the line. And for me, that's the ultimate gratification. People coming back to me, telling me that.
Well, Ray, our time has flown. It's been such a pleasure to have you on the show. I really look forward to the next time our paths get to cross in the three-dimensional, corporeal, actual world as opposed to the virtual one. This is Peter Robbins with my guest tonight, Raymond Szymanski. Meanwhile, here on Earth, Ray, what is your website?
It's a Wix site, Ray Szymanski at Wix site. It's just low-key stuff. I'm not one of those regulars on the the UFO cocktail circuit.
Very good. I want our guest to know that even though, as I mentioned in my monologue, Clifford Mahoudy is no longer with us. Clifford Mahoudy will be our guest next week in a 2-hour, in-depth biographical conversation that we recorded last March And I hope you will be here to meet this remarkable man who I loved like a brother, and I am speaking as one of many people who felt this way about this great guy. Clifford, we will miss you always, but next week here, 2 hours, the life story of Clifford Mahooty. Stay well, fight for what you believe in, and be kind to each other. See you next week.